Welcome, everybody. Today, we have a very exciting discussion. Our topic is becoming a work care champion right from the start. And, on this episode and all of our Thursdays with Third Path episodes, you'll hear from thought leaders and role models who are connected to the Third Path community. And as it says in the title today, all year long, we're looking at this concept of work care champions. People who are saying, hey, we can create workplaces that also help us take care of ourselves, our families, and our loved ones. And if you're inspired by what we're hearing today, please share our live podcast with somebody you know. So even before we got to today's event, I got a chance to interview Rainsford Stauffer. She's got two amazing books out. The first one I read was An Ordinary Age. And what I saw in her book is that she's really become a great spokesperson for young adults because she talks about how the world is pretty complicated and trying to live a good life isn't so easy. And in particular, she talked about how work can be the thing that overwhelms us, takes up so much of our time and energy. And it can take up so much of our time and energy that we don't even have time to take care of ourselves. And what we've learned at Third Path is, well, nope, you can actually learn some work-life integration skills that help us put a better boundaries around work and live better lives. But it's not just work that's a challenge. We live in a crazy 24/7 world, and that can be a problem when it shows up around social media and how that can kind of overwhelm us as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that today too. And Rainsford's message is that, yes, there will be challenges that we face, but that if we have the ability to learn from those challenges, that we can create a life that's really intentional and more of what we want. Today, you're going to hear from three people who will go into each parts of what Rainsford talked about in different ways. Cameron Camera is going to be talking to us a little bit about how the workplace can be thought of in a new and more way that supports our well-being. Carter Script is going to be talking about how we can do things at home, even as young adults, that will make a difference around our well-being. And I'm really happy to have Pilar McDonald joining us. She's been running something called Project Matriarchs, and she's showing us how we all need to be involved with some advocacy work if we want to create these families and workplaces that really support us to live whole lives. So we're going to talk a little bit about work. And obviously the world of work has changed quite a bit. More and more organizations are supporting people to live and work in a hybrid way, which at Third Path we've learned really helps us better manage our work and life responsibilities. But some are returning to the old ways. We're going to talk about what's happening at home. In particular, we're going to be using a conversation from Eve Rodsky's book, Fair Play, about the cards that she's developed that help people think a little bit about their work and life responsibilities and how to divide things up and share the mental load at home. It's really been a fun conversation with our guests today about this topic. And then, as I mentioned, Pilar's been doing some advocacy work. And so Pilar and I are going to talk a little bit about how all of this works together, how careers and family and our organizations all influence each other and how we can influence them so that we can create the life we want. So without further ado, I'm going to talk to Cameron a little bit about what I learned from Cameron and work. Hey there. So glad to have you. I have to tell a little story about Cameron before we get started. One reason I've gotten to know Cameron over the years is because her mom is one of our board members. And when Cameron was young, her mom and dad made a big change in their lives because they could see that suddenly there was summers where you didn't have normal childcare available. And so they really switched things around. And her mom ended up being the person who was in charge mostly during the summers, and her dad did the lion's share of the responsibilities during the school year. So Cameron grew up where that was the norm, to watch her parents really share the mental load. So I was giving you the big applause about how your parents really modeled something different for you. And I wondered how that shaped some of your actions today before we talk about work.
Yeah. I think ultimately, I shared this with you before. I think it took me a long time to even be aware that the situation that I was raised in was different. I would say, well into college and even an adult before I even knew that it was different, before I could even recognize that my husband and I were raised differently. So to even see it was, I was delayed in even seeing that in my life, which is a beautiful thing. But it also meant that I was much older before I realized, oh, there's probably some things my husband and I are going to need to work through together, or some ways that I'm going to have to tackle my life that might have been unforeseen. So, yeah, if anything, I've actually had to do a little bit of learning about the way a more traditional family even works before I had to start trying to implement some of these things in my own life. But I've been very lucky that my husband and I have been able to work together and kind of find our way that works and model some of those things off of my parents, but then also model some of those things off of the way he was raised too. So, yeah, if anything, I can just say it's been a lot of learning on my part to kind of figure out where to draw those boundaries for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, that's where I want to go next is to think a little bit about, again, I think by osmosis, you took some things in. You might not know this about your parents either, but like your mom, actually, when she started the job she had before the one she has right now, the norm was for people to work all weekend, work on vacations. And she was like, oh, no, not for my team. We're going to do things differently. And so I think, again, when I was talking to you, you really learned how to kind of set some physical and mental boundaries. I thought the first one you talked about when we originally talked about this was you learned that you were kind of ruminating about work, even when you had left work. And so you kind of took on a practice of like, okay, how do I stop this? Because when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm not working, I don't want to be thinking about work. How did you first notice this? How did you make that change?
Yeah, I think there were little things like I would, for one, I had a habit of coming home and I'd been thinking about work still in the car. And so then I'd come home and I'd immediately get on my computer. And, just then you're continuing working, you look up, it's been an hour of working more. Um, so I've tried to stop that habit. I also, in general, have I read online, you should have a cue for ending your day. So I might stop on the way home and get a Diet Coke or something like that. So I do little things that help me realize, like, okay, this is my day is over. I've had my treat. Or I might listen to a podcast, just little things that help me really feel empowered to disconnect. And then I also have balanced that with working a little bit earlier in the day. I could get to work a little earlier than I did in the beginning of my career because I've realized I'm more efficient during that time. So maybe I don't leave work with as much unresolved tasks as I might have early in my career. So I don't know. I've just kind of shifted my day around a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think it is, there's a real important message there. These are skills we can learn, we can be intentional about, and we can find the right rhythm for us of when to work and when to not work. And you've really been quite good at that. In fact, another great story you shared when we were talking before was how at one point, your husband would kind of bring his laptop to dinner. And you guys were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? And partly it's because he works in a very different work environment. But there was a conversation that you had. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately, we were newly married and I just kind of had to level with him and say, I want to have some time and even during the weekdays for us to spend together. And we do an awesome job of planning fun stuff on the weekends and going on vacation, but just that kind of day-to-day connection, time to walk the dogs, do things that's enjoyable and that kind of breaks up the week. And it was really one conversation and I can honestly say he's never brought his laptop to the table after that. I think it was good for boundary setting even for himself to realize it is acceptable for me, even in the work culture that I'm in, to take an hour, hour and a half in the evening during busy season for dinner with my wife. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, even he jokes with me all the time. He's like, if you and I weren't married, I don't think I would have ever woken up from that stupor. Right. So I think it empowered him in a way too, but he was very open to that conversation. It was just happened to be initiated by me.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think you took some stuff in by osmosis because I literally remember talking to your mom about her busy season. She's an accountant. And so she would have this busy season, and accountants notoriously just worked all the time through busy season. And she learned, nope, I got to take a break. And she'd kind of set things up in her life so that she'd have that step away from the work, even during busy seasons, because Cameron, I'm sure what you've seen is we all work better when we actually take that break. So it's not
Sure.
even, we're doing it for ourselves, but it turns out it's better for our organizations to take care of ourselves, and even during busy seasons. So, well,
Absolutely.
you've also had, lots and lots of examples around stuff that you're doing that I think is so smart. Maybe it's your whole generation smarter, maybe it's just Cameron smarter, but like taking vacations and learning how to really set some boundaries around vacations. Can you talk a little bit about how you and your husband have figured out how to enjoy vacations?
Yeah, I think I had shared with you, I have the expectation with my team that if something is extremely urgent, they have a way to get in contact with me. But I would say most of the time that they don't use that lifeline. And I think there's a couple reasons why. One of the reasons is I protect their vacation time, right? So I teach them through my own actions that I'm not going to use the lifeline. I think my general attitude towards our work is that things might feel really big in the moment. We can probably solve it, right? And just having a very, tailoring my leadership style towards them solving the problems, enabling them to approach the problem without using my help. And I think most of the work that I do to get away from my vacations for my vacations happens all the other times when I'm not on vacation, right? Enabling my team more when I am here, even, when I'm present, teaches them that, they don't necessarily need me. So just trying to empower them as much as possible. And then, my husband, him and I have talked about this a lot. He's now in a management role. He's sharing with me, he's trying to implement similar things. So I think it's just a matter of enabling and training your people to be able to live without you, right? It's nice to be wanted, but I think it's sometimes nicer not to need to be wanted.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we're going to circle back to that issue about nice to be wanted in a little bit, because Cameron shared another way she's grown that I think is really very wise for her age. So we've learned to set some boundaries. You've learned, this comes up in all different kinds of ways, how to set your day up differently, how to set your vacations up differently. But I was so impressed because it's not just the workplace that can be all consuming. We live in a world where there's lots of other things that can be all consuming, including social media. And we can really kind of suddenly, every free moment, be scrolling through stuff that may be a good use of our time, might not be a good use of our time. You've learned some pretty cool habits around social media. Can you share them with us?
yeah, so when we talked, I was quitting cold turkey from social media for the month of January. I do that every year. I feel mentally my best during that, kind of month of my life. So I actually am back on it in February, but significantly reduced because after you're off of it for a little bit, you just don't feel as chained to it. And after we talked, I even thought a little bit about, a lot of people are really hesitant to just quit cold turkey. So another thing that I'm doing now is I don't keep the apps downloaded on my phone. I can go access them on the internet, but they make the access through the internet inherently clunkier because they want you to have their app because then you're more inclined to use it more. So that's been my new advice for people is if you're wanting to maybe limit your usage but not totally quit cold turkey like I have, which I still think you should consider. But a good happy medium is back it off, make it a little harder to use, harder to access because yeah, it's been extremely good for my mental health just to have the break.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you told me it's almost like it opens up a different world of ways to use your time and your brain. More podcasts are listened to. You even said that you were able to get more things done on your to-do list. Um, and that you have a friend who's now doing the same thing because she was so inspired by you. Any other advice around social media? But I was just so impressed with that. That was really cool.
No, I mean, it did. Everything you said is true. I feel like it's so I know that there's definitely some science to this, but at the end of my day, when I haven't used my phone as much, I haven't been, exposing myself to the light and to all of the different dopamine and everything that you get from social media, I just feel like I have more brain power and more room for, expending that energy other places. So yeah, my to-do list and my curiosity and other things, I use that energy elsewhere. So I saw some huge benefits in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, what you didn't know as you're listening in today is that Cameron's also part of something what Third Path offers called our Overwhelm Mitigation Groups, OMG for short. And the idea is that we learn from the leaders who are part of our community, including her mom, Michelle, that if we could teach people earlier in their careers how to think in an integrated way, it would help them make wiser, more intentional choices as they hit different milestones over the course of their career. And one of the things I talked to Cameron about was something that she's still learning about, I'm still learning about, which is this concept of quiet time. So we actually have one of the topics that people do in the OMG calls where we're encouraging people to think about their work week and say, hey, do you actually have some time every week where you can actually do some focused, uninterrupted work? And I think this is a problem for everybody today. We live in a world where there's so much coming at us, and the ability to kind of talk about boundaries, have a predictable moment in time where you can do the work you're supposed to do, think bigger, plan, delegate, all that stuff. So it's not an easy task. Have you been learning a little bit about quiet time and maybe even where it's hard, what makes it hard, or a tip you've learned around the importance of kind of finding routine time at work for focused work?
Yeah, I think it I've been thinking a lot about this, even especially since we talked. It's hard for me to find the same spot in my week every week, but if I take the time, maybe on a Friday before the next week, or if you get booked up, that early in advance, maybe 2 weeks out, and I'll block a couple hours. And if I schedule it, if I physically put it on my Outlook calendar, I will do it, and not just kind of earmark it in my brain. But if I schedule it, then it's respected. People don't try to schedule me during that time. I don't try to schedule myself during that time. So that's my best tip. And that's for somebody that I can't say, oh, all Monday afternoons I'm going to take for myself. But I can at least say, hey, where's a couple hours in my next couple of weeks that I'm going to physically block? And that's been really great for me. It is hard to find that time. So I've practiced since you and I last spoken. It's been going great. I'm a little more caught up than I was last time we talked. That's all I can say.
Good, good, good. Glad that conversation inspired you. You also mentioned that earlier morning time has become a little bit of your quiet time. So you have a little bit of time every morning because you get in there a little bit before people to kind of get your day started. And I think that's not surprising that a Friday or a Monday becomes the day that is a preferred quiet time moment because you're kind of planning ahead for the week on a Friday, or you're reflecting back and planning ahead on a Monday. So that makes a lot of sense. So one last thing that I learned when I was talking to you, again, just a wonderful conversation with you've got a lot of wisdom around how to approach these things, that you've learned, we all need to get to know ourselves better. What are our strengths? Where do we need to grow? And you mentioned how you learned, hey, instead of me always answering questions for people with the answer, maybe I can turn it around some way and have them talk about what they're trying to figure out more. Tell me more about why that's been such a good thing for you to learn about.
Yeah, I think ultimately I work in a very technical organization. I work with a lot of engineers, and engineers love having the answers and they love sharing thoughts and wisdom. And maybe I fell into the trap of wanting to share mine. And whenever I, have progressed in my career a bit more and have gained maybe some more confidence than I had early in my career, I'm learning that I sometimes get more out of people by asking them the question. So answering a question with a question. Sometimes people ask me my opinion and I start with, well, what do you think first? Because, maybe my opinion isn't the most important. So I've gotten a lot of really great feedback from people, and it's nice because they answer before they're biased to agree with me. And so we sometimes come up with new solutions through that method. Yeah, it's just been a great tool for working with groups and managing people.
Yeah. Yeah, really a lot of wisdom. Thank you, Cameron. So we're going to see Cameron a little bit because she's going to come back when we talk about this intersection of work and family and how it all blends together. But thanks for your conversation so far.
Thank you.
Hey, Carter.
Hello, hello.
Well, and I'm sure as you were listening into some of these work tips, they were ringing bells for you as well, because
Of
that's the
course.
whole point. We're trying to think about, we are both someone who wants to do a great job at work, but we also want to have time and energy to be the person we want to be in our lives outside of work. And you and Rory are living together, and you started living together in the pandemic, and you were noticing that things felt a little chaotic because you're both working, but you both need to have food, and you both need to have clean clothes, and you both need to do all these other things. And tell us a little bit about that moment in time and how things changed.
Yeah, I would say so the pandemic started. My fiance Rory was a senior in college, and so their whole last semester of school got interrupted with the pandemic, and that's when the decision came to for them to move in with me. And obviously, work changed for me as well. We all went remote, so there was a lot of like transition and change in that moment. And I think we were living together really for the first time, so it was a lot of adjustment at once. And I think I started to notice, and we started to notice that sort of things just weren't quite getting done, or we didn't really talk about a plan for how things were going to get done. So I think we ended up in a moment of chaos with really Rory was finishing their thesis. I was trying to fundraise in a moment of chaos in the world. And we were really just not focusing on creating the best home life for each other. And in a really important time where there's a lot of uncertainty and things like that. So I think I ended up coming across Eve Rodsky's book. It was recommended to me by a colleague who had used it before the pandemic to really change her life, her home, work life, everything in between with her husband. And so after reading that, I kind of sort of opened up that conversation with Rory. I was like, hey, do you want to explore this book with me? And luckily, Rory was super into it and could sense some of the issues that were going on. And then we kind of went from there.
Yeah, yeah. And I got to talk to you guys kind of earlier in the process, and we'll talk about where things are today.
Mhm.
But what was so fun was how much Rory gave you credit, and said, it's again, the assumption is that women are going to be the ones who figure this stuff out.
Mhm.
And, here you were really leading the way of saying, how do we create a happier home life? And I heard a lot of tips from that conversation. I heard, for
Mhm.
example, dividing up tasks by what you like. Um,
Mhm.
what have you learned around that?
Yeah, totally. I think luckily we're able to figure out that Rory really hates doing the dishes, and I think that's kind of like the first place that it started. I think it was a chore they had to do when they were younger, and I think it just came around into adulthood as something that they really disliked. It took a lot more time for them to do it because they wanted to do it super well. We're a little bit of a perfectionist about it. So it started with initially the dishes, and I'm like, okay, I will commit to doing the dishes if you'd like. And I love cooking a lot more. So essentially the kitchen became my space that I was in charge of or responsible for throughout our chores and work life, life at home. And then I was able to identify a few things like doing the laundry that Rory was happy to do because they could just throw on an audiobook and do the laundry and sort of have a fun time while they're doing well. That's like not something that I would have chosen to do in that moment. So we just like had a really candid conversation about things we hate. Rory has doesn't like particular smells, so I handle the trash, and cat litter and things like that.
Nice.
But so we made it fun. We tried to make it like, let's try to make chores something that is not a task, but something that we are doing for the other person, as well as time for ourselves too.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the other thing I really took away, and it's a real good suggestion from Eve's book. By the way, there's these cards that you have, so you can kind of divide up the cards, and the idea is so and so's in charge of this activity, and I don't have to think about it. So there's this kind of giving a task to somebody, and then that's theirs. And it sounded like that was really working well for you guys too, to get clear about what the list of tasks were. Some of them maybe don't apply at this moment, but you got a better sense of what the big list was. And then you could also really feel 100% ownership for the task, and the other person didn't have to think about it. Does that feel like it's accurate of what happened for you guys?
Yeah. I think part of the issue was that sort of that lack of distinction about who was going to do what, when it was going to happen, and how often it should happen. Because again, we hadn't stopped to have that conversation about it. And so I think by defining it really clearly about how we like things to be done and how we like our home to feel, I think that enabled me to like take ownership of doing the dishes and doing the cooking and stuff like that. So it helped us a lot, and I highly recommend like anyone to just consider doing that with their partner. It helped a lot for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the other thing that I've learned, which you have seen now. Work and life keep changing. So here you are a little bit later. And I think that you've learned that it's not like a check the box, you're done. Instead, there'll be different seasons, different work experiences or life experience that kind of keep on requiring you to reshape things. Is that what you're seeing too? Is that it's an ongoing task to get on the same page and feel good about things?
Yeah, totally. I think, as I mentioned to you, a couple of years, maybe 2 years after we initially went through the book, we kind of, in some ways, fell off from the list of tasks. Rory, after graduating, was unemployed for a little bit, looking for a job. But when they started full time working in accounting, they were much more busy. And I changed jobs about the same time that they did, and had a much longer commute to work. So there were just a bunch of transitions in our lives that we kind of stepped away a little bit from like the very more structured way we were doing things. And I think like it kind of went back to some of that sort of disorganization and chaos. But I think the most important thing was that we realized that we just needed to have a conversation. It didn't have to be anything big or challenging. It's just like, hey, like let's assess where we're at. Let's assess the season of life that we're in, and how can we make the chores and home responsibilities work the best for us. So there was a little bit shakeup of some of the tasks based on timing. Rory was working from home, so they could take care of particular things, and I had more time on the weekends, so I could step in there. But yeah, so I think my whole thing about it is that reopening the conversation, realizing that it doesn't have to stay set in stone as long as you're like communicating with each other and sharing how you're feeling about the workload, I think is most important.
Yeah. And what you said, which I'll underscore, is because you've had the conversation once, the second time you have it and the 15th time you have it, it just gets easier and easier because you've learned how each other work. You have had some success around it. And so, again, that's the message today. Don't wait to have these conversations. You can have these conversations early in your relationship, and it really will only help you have those conversations later, which we're going to talk about shortly, how they can get a little bit more complicated. So great. The last thing I wanted to have, it'll kind of set us up for where we're going next. So we got a chance to talk a little bit about how our families of origin maybe shaped our thinking about this, because we wanted to do it the same or differently. Any insights from when we, those conversations that you want to share?
Yeah, no, I think for me, growing up, I definitely, what I saw in my family is that my mom take on the majority of some of the responsibilities, as opposed to my dad. And things got better as I grew up, but I think she started having these conversations with him, maybe not about the book particularly, but as they had my brother a bit later in life. He's 16 years younger than me. And so I think when he was in the picture, they really started sharing the load a bit more. So I guess to go back to it, maybe I didn't really notice this, is like I saw them adjusting, I saw them changing and working together better. And I think that allowed me to see that, change is possible, and it's never, set in stone and things like that. But yeah, I think I always wanted to be a man who was responsible and did the things to make my partner feel like the workload was fair and equitable, because I think it just leads to a better relationship
Oh,
overall, more
it does.
communication and everything like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's a very virtuous cycle where you feel like they're taking care of each other and being thoughtful of each other.
Mhm.
And again, many more curveballs will come your way, but you have a foundation of already doing this well. This is wonderful. Where we're going to go next is to talk a little bit about how, okay, we've got work, we've got home life, and, along comes a baby. And how does this all work? So I'm going to get Pilar up next. Thank you, Carter. This was really great.
Thank you.
We're going to see Carter in a second again. Wonderful.
Hello,
Hey,
everyone.
Pilar. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here because, again, you kind of understood that uh, every generation needs to be working at trying to think differently around these issues. And because all generations are working together, we can create a more supportive workplace. We can create more norms at home where it just becomes as typical for all genders to be involved with home life, as opposed to it being seen as women's domain. Um, and so you've been listening in a little bit around some of these issues. I'm sure that they resonate, and that there's some things that you heard that you feel like are especially important for this younger generation to be thinking about. So what are some things that you're excited about for the younger generation to consider as they wrestle with these issues?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that even just hearing both Cameron and Carter kind of talking about having these conversations with their partners early on in their relationship, especially before they've kind of had kids or possibly ventured into that arena, I think is really inspiring to me to just think about really facing a relationship head on with prioritizing these types of conversations and thinking around this. So I'd say kind of baseline, that's what I'm very impressed with. And I think that's something that scares me a lot going into any kind of full relationships. I'm still in college, so I am definitely not there quite yet. But I think to know that other people are having those conversations definitely gives me comfort, because both on a super personal level, I believe that's incredibly important. And then kind of in my theory of change and belief on all things in terms of bringing young people into these conversations and movements around care, I believe that having the super interpersonal relational conversations with a partner are super duper important. And so I find it very comforting, I guess, and inspiring to know that people are having that and doing that work at this
Yeah.
point in their lives and relationships.
Yeah. And what Pilar was able to see, we had invited her to our leadership summit that happens every 2 years. And so she could see that there was a community of people who were thinking differently. And that it is not just, it's both. We need to be thinking differently at work, and we need to be thinking differently at home, and that both are part of the change equation. And this is especially true because along comes a baby. And so that's what I want to talk about next. that both, and we're going to have them back to talk about this in a second. Both Cameron and Carter are imagining one day their lives might include a child. And when you think about what you've observed around how that plays out, what have you noticed around how along comes the baby? What are some things that you see happening that you'd like to maybe see different in the future?
Yeah. I believe that I just feel very lucky in being able to kind of through my work be able to have a lot of these conversations with adults and people such as Carter and Cameron and yourself who have gone through these things, because I think it's super important as a young person kind of thinking about this as a part of my life to be able to see people modeling it as you've spoken to. And I found that a very impactful part of my joining the leadership summit last year. But I think that specifically a baby in having all of these conversations, I think that it's very easy to throw all of these kind of expectations with a partner out the window because there's so much coming at you, so much news, so much excitement, so much fear and stress. And I haven't had a child myself, but I can only imagine. And having talked to people who had and watching my mom have, I have 3 younger siblings, so definitely was there to observe some of that. But I think that, yeah, making sure that you have a very strong base, both at home with a partner and at work, is super important going into that. And so I think that being able to build those relationships and those expectations for yourselves and those around you in the workplace or partner or family, whatnot, are super important before you even think about that part of your life, specifically so that when that comes along, all those things are super steady and able to fall back on, opposed to have to make those plans once you have a reason to make those. So I really believe in my conversations with a lot of college students and young people right now that these conversations need to be a part of how we're choosing our partners, how we're choosing our workplaces, and really kind of what we're negotiating at this point, so that when we get to that point, that is already set in, I forget what the saying is, but that's already kind of the expectation, and then you can bring in the new changes.
Yeah, yeah. And I really like your point that you've done some homework of meeting different families who've arranged their lives differently, because I think there's some really strong assumptions out there about how things should be done, how we should do our careers, work first careers. Who should be the primary parent? Maybe it shouldn't just be mom, primary parent. Whoever's home, if there's a 2-parent household, they're both equally capable of doing caregiving. And there's a lot of value of having, if you're a 2-parent household, both parents learn how to really comfort children and be actively involved in the care of their families. Well, let's go ahead and hear from Carter and Cameron about some of this stuff. So hold on a second, we'll invite them back. So, wow. For those who were here for the live discussion, this was amazing. Oh my goodness, it gives me so much hope. Because right away, the things that came up were, for example, the more you're exposed to different ways to imagine work and family blending together, the more options you'll have available. Good communication is really critical. It's at the center of figuring this out. Knowing what your values are and keeping those front and center as you're figuring out your solution. In fact, another idea was maybe it's not even a guarantee that you'll have kids, but you'll keep on looking to see if you have similar values, if you can communicate, if you can imagine a future that you're both excited about. Kids will become something that becomes a real exciting option because you've gotten to that point in the conversation where you really have a shared plan, a shared vision. And I want to add one other things. I think what's going to happen is you're going to be at an age where you start watching others have kids. And hopefully you're going to see some that are inspiring, but you're probably going to see some that are like, wow, I don't want to do it that way. And so it's like there's a lot of pressures to do work and family a certain way and to keep on remembering communication, values, shaping a common future. Pilar, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I feel like I am always watching, not in a
Bad way.
not
No.
too much, but I feel like
Observing.
I'm always watching young
Yep.
people and people who have more experience kind of in relationships and building a family and work-life balance. And I very much have people I look up to. And as you're saying, Jessica, people who I don't necessarily feel like that's what I want to replicate. But I think having conversations with other young people in your life about what this might look like for you, what your expectations are. I feel like, Jessica, I've really appreciated being able to build a relationship with you because of how honest and candid you are about your experience, and kind of having that raw advice to really work off of and think about what I'm thinking about and what I want to bring into a relationship and in finding my first job and building a career, but being very intentional about these choices. So just in terms of grand advice to anyone who's listening, I would definitely say kind of making sure that you are taking a step back, as Cameron, you're pointing out, and kind of learning what you might have wish you'd done differently as a parent or as someone kind of in the first steps in their career and work-life balance, and then really kind of implementing that and supporting young people or people beginning this journey in implementing that, because I think it's definitely something that we need support on. But I think especially talking to other peers and people of my age, I think it's something we're excited to do and see a lot of great models. And so wanting to really put that into action.
Well, I have good news. In a second, I'm going to be sharing with you guys. I know Pilar has to leave shortly, so we're going to hear from Carter and then Cameron, and then I'm going to share a couple more thoughts, and then we'll hear a little bit more from Carter and Cameron too. Carter, when you listened in to our conversation about blending work and family, what's a big takeaway that you had?
Yeah, I think maybe there was a little bit of like a subtext about, the decision that I think Cameron was alluding to, that I alluded to a little bit about, like, I think what's really important is also that decision of when to do it. And I've personally seen people that I know that become a bigger issue. And so I think it's really important as we think about having kids to really be open and honest with our partners and spouses about, when, especially if you are the man, I think it's extra important to think about the timing there. But, Rory and I have talked about, like, Rory wants to go back to school. We're thinking about a potential move in the future. So I think we have to really bring all of these factors into consideration, because it's a super big decision, one that will hopefully be amazing and fun and all of that, but it's a big decision. So to come at it with intentionality around the timing that works for both you and your partner.
Yeah. We'll come back to the timing when we get past these exciting couple of other comments I want to make in a second. But Cameron, when you heard us talking about all this, what came to your mind?
I really am just kind of revitalized by some of the discussion about the fair play model and the way that we really divide and conquer. I tell my husband all the time, we have a group project. This life that we are doing together is our group project. And so I think in school, group projects get a bad rap. And I think in life, the goal is to do them a little better than that. So it's super cool to hear about, Carter, how you implemented some of those tactics in your life. We benefited hugely from those tactics as well. Just to hear even about how we all do that a little differently is super cool, and something that is just so exciting. I feel like I get a new wave of excitement about that topic every time we talk. So very cool.
Wonderful. Well, wait till you hear what else I have to share, and you will hear from Carter and Cameron before we wrap up. So I'm going to put up a couple of more slides. All right. So one of the things I didn't talk about today, because I knew there was going to be a rich conversation and we couldn't cover all the bases, but if you do go ahead and listen to the Rainsford interview that we did, you can find it on our YouTube channel. You'll see that she's really good at reminding us that this is all within a context of some structural challenges. We do not live in a world that really supports smart workplaces, smart families with lots and lots of support for them. And that we shouldn't think that our failings or how hard it is a reflection of us personally, but also it's a reflection of how much lack of support there is for some of these very important basic things. But I loved the quote from Margaret Mead, because, us working together to make change, we really can make change. All right, so what am I excited about? What we've seen, we've been around for 24 years, and what we've really seen, and you're seeing it in the stories that you heard today, is that when in a two-parent household, both parents get clear about what their most important values are, get good at communication, that they're going to have much more success fighting some of those challenges that still exist out there in the external world, those demanding jobs that expect people to give all of their time. And we're going to be looking at some of this at ThirdPath's 2024 Virtual Parents Forum. So around the corner, at the end of April, we have an event for parents, for young people, for soon-to-be parents, for seasoned parents, for single parents, for dads, for all genders, to come together because they want to create a life where they have time for work and they can be great at work, but they also have time for their loved ones. And so we've really designed this virtual event with you in mind, where you pay one registration fee and then you attend a little bit on our kickoff day, which is the April 19th. Then we have a Wednesday workshops that you can participate in. And then we have this really kind of great closing event where you can imagine kind of your next steps. So this is a great event that only happens every 2 years. And right now you can even get our early bird special. So we really want to create a community where we can all learn from each other and keep on coming back every 2 years to the Parents Forum to keep on learning from each other about how to create these really successful, thriving lives that include a lot of well-being around work and family. All right, so don't forget, there's lots of ways to continue the conversation. You can join us in our Facebook group. You can come to the next Thursday event. And of course, we are a nonprofit, and we've really created our amazing community of role models and change agents because of the donors who support our work. So considering going on our website and becoming a donor today. All right, we're going to hear some last words from Cameron and Carter. Okay, I can't thank you enough for both being here. I know that people are going to be inspired by you guys. You were inspired by each other. Just so glad to have you be part of the Third Path conversation and community. Carter, any last thoughts that you want to share?
The only thing that came to mind as you were kind of doing your ending slides was that I think it's often hard, as a young person, because there aren't resources available. You can maybe go ask your parents like how you did this, but then maybe that's an awkward conversation, depending on the home you grew up in. So all I'd say, it's great that these resources are out there, and I hope that they can continue to proliferate, because especially as I think our generation is hopefully thinking about these things in a new way, I think the resources are going to need to be there to continue to push the conversation forward and create better families and work-life balance and all of the above for everyone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. One of my favorite things that happens at the forum is one of the events we have for parents who've been there before is something where we have different age parents be in a group together, and they can think a little bit about what's around the corner, so because it keeps on changing, when you're parenting an infant, it's very different than when you're parenting a school ager and a teenager. So it's just really fun to have this community that you can keep on coming back to and learning from. So Cameron, any last thoughts? So glad you were here.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I didn't have a chance to share earlier that I think a lot about in regards to these topics is a lot of times we think about how we advocate for ourselves. And another thing I've started to think about as a leader in my organization is how to advocate for the people that work for me. So, what Pilar said about how we all have the opportunity at every generational level to pave the way, I think there's some immense truth to that. But something that I think about a lot is I manage a lot of men, and those are a lot of husbands that owe it to their families to, do some of this work with their wives. And so just kind of taking that forward and being a leader to, advocate for the people around us as well as we do this internal reflection, something that I think we can all start to do. So that's the only other thing I wanted to share.
Wonderful last insights from both of you. Thank you so much for being here. Really wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.